Let's now jump into 12 unhealthy mental habits. Now, what I want you to understand about these unhelpful mental habits is that, now, number 7, minimization or magnification. And this simply means that you are emphasizing the negative and playing down the positive of a situation. So, for example, my professor said he made some corrections on my paper. So, I know I'll probably fail the class. Correction that your professor made doesn't have anything to do with your failure, but you are downplaying the fact that your professor is making corrections so that you can be better, and you are magnifying the fact that you have this anxiety, this nervousness, this disturbing thought about failing the class. Sometimes there could be a pointer to some other deeper things, okay? Mental filter is number 8. When you are placing your attention on or seeing the negatives of a situation. My husband says he wishes I was better at housekeeping, so I must be a lousy wife. My boss says that he wishes, or my boss expected me to deliver that thing on Monday, so I must be a bad employee. You are the one filtering what is going on mentally. And it usually happens when you place your attention on the negatives of a situation. So are you getting me? And number 9, which is mind reading. This one is very trickish. And the reason why I say it's trickish is because, or it's tricky, choose the English that you feel is correct, okay? Whether tricky or trickish, choose the English that you feel is correct. I know some people will say that it is Scandinavian English and the other one is Bahamas English. Choose the one that you feel is correct. Now, mind reading is when you believe you know what others are thinking. I just did mind reading right now when I said you should choose the English that is correct. When I said that whether it's Bahamas English or Scandinavian English, you should choose the one that is correct. Now, how did I mind read? What I want you to understand is I just mind read everybody that, what if somebody just says that, what kind of English is this guy speaking? That's a mind reading there. And so the moment I mind read or I mind readed you, I quickly added. But what I want you to understand about mind reading is you basically make assumptions based on somebody else's thinking. You don't have access to their thinking, but you are just making assumptions because you feel that this is how this person should think. We have the tendency of doing a lot of mind reading, especially when we are looking for a result and the result is dependent on somebody else. So usually we tend to do a lot of mind reading in such instances. An example is, let's say you submit a proposal to a company and you're expecting the company to get back to you, and the people did not get back to you on time. You may start mind reading. And the interesting thing about all these mental habits is that sometimes there's a blend of 2, there's a blend of 3 that is working together per time. So you now begin to mind read and say, now let me say that you are tending towards the negative by maybe let me place it. Let's say you are catastrophizing. You've done this thing very well, or you've done the proposal very well, but you're now beginning to think, what if, or like what usually happens. So you're angry with someone, the person used to see you a particular way, and because you were angry with that person now says that, I can't believe you did this. And then you now begin to mind read that, okay, is it possible that this person is telling other people that, Dayo did this thing? Or is it possible that this person is saying, hey. But usually when we mind read, because we have the tendency of negativity, which is called negative bias of our brains, we tend to mind read towards a negative than towards positive. And is it close to intuition? Not at all. Mind reading is not the same thing as intuition. Now, because this is an emotional class, intuition tends to be a spiritual thing. Mind reading and intuition is not the same thing. Intuition usually does not have your input. Intuition just springs up from inside of you. You just know that you know, and you know that thing is that thing. That's how intuition works. So intuition usually is spiritual, but mind reading usually is emotional. And because many times our emotions and feelings towards something is created by the experiences we've had. So mind reading tends to sometimes go towards the negative. Now, number 10 is overgeneralization. We do this a lot. When you make an overall negative conclusion beyond the current situation. And the way it usually happens is, if one thing is going wrong, you draw the general conclusion that everything will go wrong. So you make statements like, I always mess up. In fact, if you have ever used this phrase, this phrase here, I just unpicked my pen. So if you have ever used this statement before, this statement here, this always, if you have ever used it before, what you are doing at that point is you are overgeneralizing. So if you say, I always fight back, I always bounce back, that is a generalization. And in my book, Limitless Courage and Confidence, I remember talking about something in, I think, chapter 1 or 2 or 3, if I'm correct. Okay, yes, that should be chapter 3. When I talk about hopefully this is going to be clear so that you can see it. So I talk about your mental model of fear and reality. And I explain what usually happens when what happens inside our brain and the universal mental models of our brain. And number 1 that I talk about, model 1, is generalization. And the way I say it is generalization happens when we use past learning in present situations because the conditions in both situations are a little similar. So if you are learning how to drive a car, when you are learning to drive the car, you are learning with a manual car. When you want to drive an automatic car, you are not learning how to drive a car altogether afresh, right? You are simply transferring the experience from how you learned how to drive manual car to automatic car. Do you get that? And that's the same thing we do with almost every experiences in our life. We look for similarity between them and then we generalize them. But then generalizations can sometimes turn towards negative things because we are always on the hunt for negative things anyway. So I needed to explain that. What I usually like to do is I tell people to question your conclusion. Before you come to a conclusion on that subject, on that thing, question it. Am I sure that is correct? So if you say, my husband didn't kiss me when he came home this evening, maybe he doesn't love me anymore. Question that conclusion by asking, am I sure he doesn't love me anymore? Did he say that he doesn't love me anymore? Do you get that? So I always mess up. Question, are there times that I didn't mess up, I performed very well? Can you see that this is becoming a skill now? Because rather than overgeneralization, you are learning to question your conclusion. And that's one thing that I want you to take away from here. Always question your conclusion. Nothing is completely A, nothing is completely B. Now, number 11, personalization, which is the self-blame game, where you tend to blame yourself. And how this usually happens is that you think the negative behavior of other people have something to do with you. So my spouse has been pretty quiet today. I wonder what I did to upset her. So you tend to blame yourself because of other people's misbehaviors. So glad that you are finding answers. Now, number 12, should and must statements. And should and must statement is a mental habit because it usually creates pressure from somebody else that you should be this person at this age. And because you are not this person, you are experiencing a lot of pain because you have placed unconscious rules on yourself, right? Now, I needed to explain that to also let you understand that when we're talking about should and must statements, it's about having a concrete idea of how you should behave. You try to motivate yourself and push yourself into shape mentally and physically by using should and shouldn't, oughts and must. And these words are a setup for negative self-judgment and self-blame. So for example, maybe you have some body fat and you are telling yourself, I should exercise. And so anytime you don't exercise, you fall into this cycle of negative self-judgment, into this cycle of self-blame. You begin to blame yourself that, look at you, what can you even do? You're not even exercising because it is that. Are you getting what I'm explaining? So you see that should and must statements, even though they are good, because sometimes you need to make your could, you need to make them a must and a should. But sometimes as well, in order not to create pressure for yourself, sometimes you need to do away with your should and your must. So for example, You say something like, I must have enough money to be able to marry. That is a must that you have created for yourself. And anytime you don't have enough money, you will not want to marry. The way I usually like to say it is this: we rise and fall to the level of the scripts that we are holding on to. We rise and fall to the level of the stories that we tell ourselves. We rise and fall to the level of the scripts that we want to keep at time. So when you are using should and must like this, what you find is that you will continue to rise to the level of the should and the must that you are creating for yourself. But when that should and the must is limiting, you will not be able to break past that, except you now consciously alter that should, alter that must. Are you getting me? If you're getting me, please let me know that you got me for that. I said your shoulds and your must kind of create pain for you, especially when they become unconscious rules that are now powering your life. As I said earlier on, we rise to the level of the rules that we place on ourselves. We rise to the level of the scripts and the stories we tell ourselves. So when something is now beginning to create limitations for you, you need to break past it. And in order to break past it, you need to address it and check, how true is this belief? How true is this thing? How helpful has it been for me? And that is why I gave the workbook, so that we can all look at certain beliefs, certain scripts that we are holding on to, and begin to actually address them. If you have downloaded the workbook, you can begin to look at moving beyond fear and limiting beliefs. So if you have beliefs that you have held on to, now we are going to talk about beliefs in the next session. That is right after now. I just needed to finish this first. Now, what I want you to do right now is I want you to look at all these unhelpful thinking habits, and I want you to identify the ones that you exhibit the most. What I want you to do is to note them down.